The media spent 3 days utterly consumed by a joke told by a comedian who I guess is fairly well known among a sector of people, but not particularly well known to the general population. And according to Donald Trump, he didn't know who this person was, hasn't heard of him before. His name is Tony Hinchcliffe. He's a very close friend of Joe Rogan's. And we spent 3 days talking about the meaning of this joke that he told about Puerto Rico. He also told a lot of other jokes about black people and Jews and other groups. He's an insult comic. That's what he does. And now the media has moved on, with just a few days left before the election, to Garbagegate, which arose from an appearance that the Kamala Harris campaign has been dreading of Joe Biden. Remember him? He's the sitting president of the United States, the actual person who's supposed to be making all the decisions that the United States keeps announcing about its policies in the Middle East, about its military posture, its war posture. These are all supposedly coming from Joe Biden, and yet he appeared, even though the Kamala Harris campaign just wants him to disappear as fully as possible. And even in this very low pressure context of a Zoom call, he was just on a Zoom call talking to leaders of Latino groups to try and encourage them to get Latino voters out to vote for Kamala. He basically ended up saying something that, at least as it was expressed, called half the country, namely Trump supporters, garbage. Very redolent of when Hillary Clinton called Trump supporters a basket of deplorables back in 2016, although in Hillary's defense, she said that half of Trump supporters belong in this basket of deplorables, whereas Biden seemed to be calling all Trump supporters garbage. That was the word he used, garbage. Now, this consumed the entire day. Kamala Harris gave this big, glorious, dramatic speech in Washington yesterday that was supposed to be the crowning jewel of her campaign. And after it was done, no one remembered that it happened because everybody was focused instead on what Joe Biden said. And having to clear that up all day was Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, who were asked about it everywhere they went. And now you have Donald Trump riding around in a garbage truck dressed up as a garbage man to try and exploit and extract as much advantage as possible from this comment, which obviously offends a lot of people, even people who aren't necessarily Trump voters. To call the entire country who doesn't support your party garbage is obviously something that already is resonating for people who believe that liberals look down upon them, view them as inferior, don't really have much concern for their lives. And yet, obviously, because this has the potential to harm Kamala Harris, I don't think it has a lot of potential to harm her, but it has some. The pro-Kamala media, which is basically almost all of the corporate media, sprung into action in a way that has to be seen to be believed in order to justify what Joe Biden said and to protect him. Here, for example, is the New York Times today reporting on this incident. Quote, Biden appears to insult Trump supporters as, quote, garbage, but quickly tries to clarify. So he didn't actually insult Trump supporters as garbage, according to the New York Times. He just appeared to, but then quickly tried to clarify. Here's what they said. Quote, President Biden on Tuesday denounced racist language at former President Donald J. Trump's recent rally, but appeared to insult Trump supporters as, quote, garbage, promoting waves of criticism from Republicans. So you notice right away they start off by saying, oh, what he was really there to do was to condemn racism from Trump supporters, to justify that he said that these Trump supporters, whom he was denouncing as racist, were garbage. The White House quickly objected to that interpretation of the president's remarks, arguing that he was instead describing the racist language as, quote, garbage, not Trump supporters. We'll show you the video in a second. It's beyond any dispute what Biden actually said, what actually came out of his mouth. Whatever was going on in that broken, melting brain of what he intended to express, you can debate that, but you cannot debate what he actually said. What he said was that Trump supporters are garbage. He said the only garbage I see are Trump supporters, and we'll show you that in a second. The New York Times goes on, quote, the comments came as Mr. Biden was addressing Latino supporters by video, quote, just the other day, a speaker at his rally called Puerto Rico a, quote, floating island of garbage, Mr. Biden said, referring to a riff by Tony Hinchcliffe, a comedian and Trump supporter who spoke at the rally at Madison Square Garden on Sunday. Mr. Biden said Puerto Ricans are, quote, good, decent, honorable people. Then he went on, quote, the only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. Obviously talking about Donald Trump. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. And then he added this, quote, his demonization of Latinos is unconscionable and it's un-American. The White House released a transcript that showed Mr. Biden was saying, quote, not his supporters, but his supporters with an apostrophe S that they invented to try and make it seem like Biden wasn't saying his supporters are garbage, rather that his supporters apostrophe S demonization of Latinos was what was garbage, meaning that Mr. Hinchcliffe's demonization was garbage. But Republicans seized on the seeming gaffe, comparing it to comment by Hillary Clinton in 2016 when she referred to Trump supporters as, quote, deplorables. Now, note here that the New York Times prides itself, only when Trump is president or Trump is running for president, of refusing to engage in both sides journalism, meaning all you do is say Democrats say this and Republicans say this, and you don't actually resolve the question. Your job as a journalist is to not just say this side says this and this side says this, but then to come forward and tell people which side is telling the truth and which side is lying. And they do that constantly when they're reporting on Trump said. They'll say, Donald Trump said X, Y, and Z, but there's no evidence for that, and in fact, that's a lie. If they were being at all consistent, they would use this formulation here that they're using for a comment that came from Joe Biden that could be harmful. They would say about a Trump statement, Donald Trump said X, Y, and Z. Democrats seized on it, claiming that it was a lie, but Republicans responded that they were taking it out of context and they would just wash their hands. That's what they did in this case. We're not here to say which side is right. We're just here to tell you what both sides are saying. And what the Biden White House is saying is that there was a magical apostrophe in the middle of the sentence that radically changed its meaning. Here is the video of Joe Biden on this Zoom call. I mean, just the angle of this and the way he gets to the camera, it really looks like someone in a nursing home. And the way he speaks, there's not a coherent or cogent thought that exits its mouth at this point. I saw a journalist today saying, oh, he's an old man with a stutter, trying to rejuvenate that stutter excuse. I mean, you can look back at 50 years of Biden's videos and speeches and interviews and never hear this magical stutter that they invented to justify why suddenly he was incapable of speaking coherently when he was running for president in 2020. But here is ostensibly the President of the United States, the leader of the free world, the commander-in-chief of our armed forces, which are currently deployed all throughout the Middle East and in support of the war in Ukraine and probably many, many other things that we are unaware of. Presumably he's the one presiding over all of that. He's the one making the decisions to do that. Here he is, and you can judge for yourself, A, what he actually said, and B, whether this person has any ability to even tie his own shoes, let alone exercise the functions of the American presidency.
Donald Trump has no character. He doesn't give a damn about the Latino community. He's failed businessman. He only cares about the billionaire friends he has and accumulating wealth for those at the top. He says immigrants are poisoning the blood of our country. Give me a break. He wants to do away with the birthright citizenship. Who the hell has said that in the last 100 years? And just the other day, a speaker at his rally called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. Well, let me tell you something. I don't know the Puerto Rican that I know, or Puerto Rico where I'm in my home state of Delaware. They're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters.
All right. Did you hear that? The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. That is what he said. There was no his supporters and then some noun after it, his supporters racism or his supporters bigotry or his supporters offensive comments about Puerto Rico. He said the only garbage I see out there is Trump's supporters. And then he adds on this, which somehow Democrats and the media have decided is ambiguous as to whether there was an apostrophe at the end of his supporters, that he was not condemning Trump's supporters as garbage, but something about them that's bad and wrong.
State of Delaware, they're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. His demonization of Latinos is unconscionable, and it's un-American. It's totally contrary to everything we've done, everything we've been.
I mean, that's the shocking part is it's very rare that Joe Biden speaks sentences that have an unambiguous and clear meaning. I mean, when he was talking about Puerto Ricans, he stopped himself because he was about to say where I'm from in Puerto Rico. And none of it really made any sense until he got to that part. And he's like, the only garbage I see out there are his supporters. And then he went on to say Trump's demonization of Puerto Rico is totally this and un-American or whatever. Now, again, I don't really care that much about this. I do think it reflects the liberal attitude in its sort of unvarnished form. A lot of times when you get old and senile and your brain stops functioning well, what happens is that you start losing your filter, and the things that are actually in your brain come out because you lost the capability to soften it or to disguise it or to put it into an acceptable form. I remember visiting my grandparents in nursing homes, and you would just hear the patients there, who I'm sure were nice, educated, polite people their entire lives, just saying the nastiest stuff, just vulgar and crude, because they lost their filter. Their brains were deteriorating with old age. That's what's happening here. He immediately, so I don't think that the comment in and of itself is particularly significant in the scheme of things. But what I do think is significant is the media's attempt to just pretend that it's confusing what he said, as well as the fact that this is the President of the United States still, the person who's supposed to be making decisions. Joe Biden, or someone writing under the name Joe Biden, went on to X earlier this morning. These comments were made last night, knowing that it was creating a huge problem for Kamala Harris, to try and clarify what he said. Quote, earlier today, I referred to the hateful rhetoric about Puerto Rico spewed by Trump supporters at his Madison Square Garden rally as garbage, which is the only word I can think of to describe it. His demonization of Latinos is unconscionable. That's all I meant to say. The comments at that rally don't reflect who we are as a nation. I just played what he said. That's not what he said. Maybe that's what he meant to say, but this is not what he said. Here was Kamala Harris, poor Kamala Harris, riding high on what she thought was going to be her big melodramatic appearance at the mall in Washington, the place where Trump gave his January 6th speech. That was the symbolism of it. Rachel Maddow called it the most important speech, perhaps in recent American political history. I mean, imagine how good that speech must have been for Rachel Maddow to praise it. So before that could even sink in, before anybody could even realize that she spoke, Biden appeared out of nowhere and said that, and so all day long she and Tim Walz were asked about it, and they were forced to distance themselves from it. Here's what Kamala Harris said today. This is from Fox News, after she got off a plane in Andrews Air Force Base.
Biden put this comment last night about garbage.
Listen, I think that, first of all, he clarified his comments, but let me be clear, I strongly disagree with any criticism of people based on who they vote for.
Now, I get why Kamala Harris is trying to say that. She's trying to distance herself from Hillary's deplorable comments and also from the comments of Joe Biden, her boss, last night. The problem is that the main narrative of the media and of the Democrats is that that rally at Madison Square Garden was an actual neo-Nazi rally. We covered that on Monday, this narrative about how it's a neo-Nazi rally, that it was basically the equivalent of the 1939 Nazi rally held in the United States, where there were swastikas and it was an all-white audience. They were doing the Heil Hitler salute, the Nazi salute. There was a Jewish dissenter who was attacked by the crowd, and we showed you all the differences between this rally that was fully multiracial, both in terms of who attended and who spoke, and that other one to which they were preposterously comparing it. But if you actually believe that that was a neo-Nazi rally and that the supporters there were cheering for Nazi ideas, why wouldn't you call them garbage? I mean, that would flow from the premise. They're not just saying Trump is a Nazi, they're saying Trump's movement is based on neo-Nazi fascist ideas. So if you really believe that, why would Kamala Harris distance herself? She should be saying, yeah, of course they're garbage. They're Nazis, they're fascists. But they're afraid to follow through on their logical premises because they don't actually believe the premises at all. This is an amazing thing. CNN did not just do what other media outlets did to try and invent some sort of ambiguity in what Biden said. They just outright lied about what he said. They had Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro on with Caitlin Collins, who's really becoming one of the greatest sources of disinformation in all of media, competing with Jeffrey Goldberg and Natasha Bertrand. I mean, she just lies continuously. We documented that many times before. She has a very calm demeanor as she does it. So she can cast an appearance that she's just sort of a banal media figure lying as much as the rest, but her show is as driven by falsehoods and just blatant lies as almost any other, short of MSNBC. So they had Josh Shapiro on, and here you can see on the screen, on the left is Caitlin Collins, on the right is Governor Shapiro, and the graphic on the screen that was there the whole time when Josh Shapiro was speaking about Biden's comments is, quote, this is what they claim Biden said, quote, Joe Biden, colon, the quote, only garbage I see are Trump supporters demonizing Latinos. That's just not what Joe Biden said. Maybe that's what Joe Biden meant, secretly in whatever brain cells continue to function. But you can't change what Joe Biden said and put it on a screen on a news program, because what he actually says is harmful to the campaign and to the candidate and the party that you want to win an election. Unless you're a political activist willing to lie shamelessly before an election, which of course CNN has proven many times that's exactly what they're willing to do. So here's a little bit of this as a completely fabricated quote appears on the screen the whole time as they're discussing this.
Governor, first off, just what's your response to that comment from President Biden, where it sounds like he's calling Trump supporters there garbage?
Okay, so she's right. It does sound like that. You know why it sounds like that? You know why it sounds like Biden was calling Trump supporters garbage? It sounds like that because that's exactly what he said in words that could not have been clearer. But on the screen is a completely different quote than the one that she just correctly attributed to Biden. And here's what Josh Shapiro said.
Yeah, look, I had not heard that until now, Caitlin, so I'm kind of giving you my fresh reaction to it. I would never insult the good people of Pennsylvania or any Americans, even if they chose to support a candidate that I didn't support.
Okay, so both of them. Josh Shapiro only heard it while on air with CNN. That was the first time he heard it, so he heard it as clearly as we heard it. So he just didn't try and deny that that was the meaning. But the whole time they're talking is an invented quote that's completely different than the one they're both correctly assuming Biden actually said. It just shows the willingness of CNN to lie. But also, again, Josh Shapiro saying, I would never insult or denigrate people who vote for a candidate that I don't support. But why not? Why wouldn't you? If Donald Trump is a fascist dictator, if he's the equivalent of Adolf Hitler, trying to impose American Nazism, to send journalists to camps, concentration camps, to do away with American democracy, why wouldn't you denigrate people who support a Nazi leader? Do you not denigrate the people who went into Nazi halls in 1933 and 1937 and 1940 at rallies to cheer for Adolf Hitler? Do you not condemn the people, the Americans in 1939 who went to that rally in Madison Square Garden that was actually a Nazi rally? I mean, if you want to claim that the Trump movement is an actual fascist movement, you would not be saying, oh, I wouldn't condemn anybody who votes for him or participates in these Nazi rallies. Of course you would. Now, here was the White House today giving their instructions to the media about how to defend President Biden. Of course, they all dutifully complied. Here from the White House. Remarks by President Biden on a call with Voto Latinos. So this is supposed to be the transcript of what Joe Biden said. And here's what the White House tried to get reporters to recite. Quote, this is Biden being quoted. Quote, and just the other day, a speaker at his rally called Puerto Rico, quote, a floating island of garbage. Well, let me tell you something. I don't know the Puerto Rican that I know, or a Puerto Rican. So just look at that. Look at the incoherence even in their cleaned up transcript. And just the other day, a speaker at his rally called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. Well, let me tell you something. I don't know the Puerto Rican that I know, or a Puerto Rico where I'm from, he was about to say, and then he stopped himself. And I mean, even in this cleaned up rally that they're trying to, he says, or a Puerto Rico where I'm from. And then he said, in my home state, they're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. And they put that apostrophe there. So he wasn't saying the only garbage I see out there floating around is Trump supporters. They tried to make it his supporters, apostrophe S, his demonization of Latinos is unconscionable, and it's totally un-American. It's totally contrary to everything we've done, everything we've been. And they were telling reporters this apostrophe was the key to everything, because it means he wasn't calling Trump supporters garbage, even though you all heard that with your own ears twice. And even CNN, when they first heard it, even Josh Shapiro, when he first heard it, couldn't deny it. He was actually just saying what he thinks is garbage is his supporters, his demonization of Latinos is unconscionable and it's un-American. It doesn't even make sense grammatically when you put that apostrophe in there. Of course, that apostrophe wasn't there. He called Trump supporters garbage. But here's how the media outlets complied with their marching orders. From Politico, the headline, Biden sparks a firestorm on the right over garbage. He sparks a firestorm on the right. Do you see what they do? If Trump tells a lie or a falsehood or an exaggeration according to the media, they don't say the Democrats seize on Trump's falsehood. They'll just say Trump lies about X, Y, and Z. They don't say Trump's comments sparks a firestorm on the left. But here they can't admit that Biden said something that harms Kamala Harris' campaign, so they have to frame it as Biden sparks a firestorm on the right over, quote, garbage. Quote, the White House scrambled Tuesday night to clean up a remark by President Joe Biden, who appeared to refer, again, that's the same language the New York Times used, he appeared to refer. You know why he appeared to refer? Because he did refer. Who appeared to refer to Donald Trump's supporters as, quote, garbage. Though the president and his aides vehemently denied that was his intention. Quote, the only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. So here's that apostrophe that the White House told them to use, that Politico is now using when quoting him. They're putting that apostrophe in there. Is his supporters, his demonization of Latinos is unconscionable and it's un-American, Biden said in a Zoom call. Quote, it's totally contrary to everything we've done everything we've been. So the White House invents a transcript with an apostrophe mark that blatantly was not there, and then Politico, when they go to quote what Biden said, doesn't quote the actual words that you could all hear Biden uses. It quotes the White House's attempt to grammatically confuse what he said to pretend he didn't say it. Here from the Washington Post, which was even worse. Remember, this is the paper that has immense credibility. It's a very august and trustworthy journalistic institution. They speak truth to power. And that's why it was so bad that Jeff Bezos blocked an endorsement of Kamala Harris, because this newspaper is such an American treasure that they don't take crap from anybody. They just do journalism, regardless of who it harms. And here's how they decided to frame this. Quote, did Biden call Trump supporters garbage? It comes down to an apostrophe that wasn't there, that Democrats invented. Republicans have long strained for a new Hillary Clinton's deplorable moment, but Biden's defense is entirely plausible. Now, again, this is not an op-ed. This is a news article saying that what's happening here is that Republicans have long been attempting to find some comment that they could compare to Hillary Clinton's deplorable comment, and they're doing it here even though Biden's defense of what he said is, quote, entirely plausible, because according to the article, quote, it may come down to the placement of an apostrophe, and it's worth a parse. The controversy centers on jumbled comments Biden made on a call with Latino voters. Biden invoked comedian Tony Hinchcliffe's quip at a Trump rally Sunday, labeling Puerto Rico a, quote, floating island of garbage. Comments that many Republicans and even the Trump campaign have distanced themselves from. Quote, just the other day, a speaker at his rally called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage, Biden said before his stumbles began. And then the key line. I'll offer 3 different versions which significantly change Biden's meaning, with the key part bolded. So they have these 3 formulations. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters, period, which is exactly what he said. Then the next option that they offer, that's option number 1. They're offering 3 different options how to interpret and understand a comment that could not have been clear out of Joe Biden's mouth. Quote, the second option is, the only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters, apostrophe, can we get that on the screen, the option number 2? There it is on the screen. So this is the second option. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters with the apostrophe S. And then here's the third interpretation that the Washington Post says you can use, all of which are entirely plausible. Quote, the only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters, apostrophe S, his demonization of Latinos is unconscionable and it's un-American. Quote, Republicans favor the first one because it would mean labeling at least some of Trump's supporters, quote, garbage. No, Republicans favor the first one because that's what he actually said. Anyone could, even Caitlin Collins and Josh Shapiro operate on the assumption, even though there was a screen right on the bottom of the screen as they spoke, inventing a completely false opposite meaning. But when they heard it, they both were like, yeah, we have to admit, this is what Biden said. And somehow the Washington Post decided, there's 3 different options. They're entirely plausible. Maybe there was an apostrophe in there, which even if you put in there, it still makes no sense. He stopped his sentence after supporters and said, then went on to say Trump's demonization of Latinos is unconscionable. All right, here, it's not the first time that Joe Biden, obviously, or other Democrats have spoken this way about people with whom he disagrees or people who don't snap into line before the Democratic Party. Here was Joe Biden on C-SPAN in February of this year talking about people who have skepticism about the theories of climate change that Biden believes in.
The idea there's no such thing as climate change. I love that, man. I love some of my Neanderthal friends who still think there's no climate change.
All right, so people who are skeptical of climate change theories are Neanderthals. Remember, even when he was on the Breakfast Club running for president in 2020, when the host noted to him that, hey, there are a lot of black people who are saying they're not convinced they should vote for you, and he responded by saying, look, if you're black, if you aren't sure by now that you're voting for me, you ain't black. This is how they think, that if you don't snap into line behind Democrats, it means you're a bad person. Here was Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, getting asked about these Biden comments. And again, the Kamala Harris campaign wants Joe Biden to just stay quiet, to go to bed, not to appear at all. And because he just popped up in the easiest setting, he wasn't being interviewed, he wasn't being questioned or pressed, he was just on a Zoom call. And he managed to just consume the entire day, all of Kamala's day, her big campaign day that was supposed to be about her glorious speech. They wanted to do a 4th day of an analysis about Tony Hinchcliffe's joke about Puerto Rico. Instead, they even made the press room just because Biden appeared and his brain spit this out. Here is what she had to say when being asked about this by the press.
Can you just address the president's comments yesterday referring to Trump supporter as garbage? And I know he's tried to clarify that he was trying to talk about what the person said. But one, I guess I want to know, does he think less of Americans who support Trump than he does of those who do not? And 2, why is he using that kind of rhetoric? How is that presidential?
So a couple of things. So just to clarify, he was not calling Trump supporters garbage, which is why he put out, this is why he wanted to make sure that we put out a statement that clarified what he meant and what he was trying to say. And so just want to make that very clear for folks who are watching. And I just want to read that out to folks. So he was regarding to the comedian, and I quote, I referred to the hateful rhetoric about Puerto Rico spewed by Trump's supporter at his Madison Square Garden rally as garbage, which is the only word I can think of to describe it. His demonization of Latinos is unconscionable. That's all I meant to say. The comments at the rally don't reflect who we are as a nation. And to your question, your other question that you asked, no, he does not to view Trump supporters or anybody who supports Trump as garbage. That is not what he views. If the president has said this for more than 3 years now, he has said multiple times that he is a president for all. It doesn't matter if you live in a red state. It doesn't matter if you live in a blue state. He has said this himself. I have said it on his behalf. He believes that he's a president for all. And it doesn't matter who you voted for. It doesn't matter if you voted for him or not. He's a president for all. But hateful rhetoric that he hears, and this is something that we've done many times from here, we will call that out. We will call that out. And that's what the president said.
Anyway, that was like a 2 full minute. Imagine how angry the Kamala Harris campaign has to be at Joe Biden. I mean, I do think I don't want to armchair psychoanalyze Biden, but remember that he wanted to run. He was adamant that he should run. He was insistent that he was definitely the best candidate, that he would beat Trump. He's been chasing this office his entire life. And the people who he thought were his closest allies, Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, didn't just say, you have to get out of this race. They threatened him. They were leaking against him. Like gradually. People like George Clooney were like, this isn't the same Biden. I know Democratic donors were saying, we're not going to fund your campaign unless you get out. They were putting on the screws on him in every conceivable way possible. And he got out of the race for every reason other than because he wanted to. You don't think there's a part of Joe Biden that's enraged by the Democratic Party? I mean, it really is true. Imagine, he's been in Washington for 50 years. These are his friends for 50 years who were leaking against him and then threatening to even go so far as to use the 25th Amendment to remove him from office. He didn't leave. Remember, Nancy Pelosi said, we can do this the easy way or we can do this the hard way. It's why Harry Truman said, if you want a friend in Washington, get a dog, because these people will stab you in the back the first second that it serves their interest of power to do so. And that's what they did to him. And there's, of course, some part of him that wants Kamala Harris to lose because that will be able to vindicate his view that he was the best candidate. Now, I'm sure part of him wants Kamala to win because it sort of reflects well on his term if his vice president ends up winning. But someone who fights and claws and scratches in Washington for 50 years to gain nothing other than power is not a person who just takes something like that happily and says, oh, I don't want any revenge, and just I'm okay with it. There's definitely some sabotage in that brain, and we've seen it many times before. I mean, they've said to him, we don't want you appearing. It doesn't help us, and he just keeps insisting. Tim Walz went on CBS News today, and he also was asked about it. I just think it's so funny how Joe Biden just pops up and then destroys the 24-hour news cycle of Kamala Harris's campaign. Here's what he said when asked.
We're talking about it. We're joined now by the Democratic vice presidential nominee, Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. Governor, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Tony. Thanks for having me.
I want to get your reaction to the president's comments, but I want to put it into a larger context of your recent comment comparing the Sunday Trump rally to a Nazi rally. And I would also throw in there Obama's bitter clingers, guns and religion comment from a while back, the deplorable line from Hillary Clinton's campaign, and the way that Democrats are seen by some voters as disrespecting them. And I have to ask, does that undercut this closing message of unity from your campaign?
No, certainly not. And for Tony, for me, I've represented rural areas. I've represented Democrats, Republicans, Independents. Same thing with the vice president. Look, you saw a presidential speech last night at the Ellipse that is the best of America, one that's talking about unifying us, one that's talking about bringing folks to the table, one that the American tradition of disagreeing and debating, but still doing it in a respectful manner. And I think there's the frustration we've seen since January 6th, the frustration with Donald Trump's rhetoric of division. It does fire passions, and I think President Biden was very clear that he's speaking about the rhetoric we heard at that, so it doesn't undermine it. People are hungry to come back together. They're hungry to find a unifying message. They're hungry for us to find solutions, whether it's prices or whether it's reproductive care. They want to see solutions.
It doesn't make any sense. I mean, the premise of the question was, hey, remember that you compared Donald Trump's rally to a Nazi rally, meaning the people who are there and cheering were supporting a new Hitler, a Nazi fascist movement. And he went on to say, look, I would never insult those people who were there for that Nazi rally. And there were all those examples. Obama in 2008, here from Politico, was when he said, when trying to explain why a lot of conservatives are hostile to Obama's campaign, he said, because they cling to their religion and to their guns and to their xenophobia. Obama said, quote, just for those who don't remember, you go into these small towns in Pennsylvania, and like a lot of small towns in the Midwest, the jobs have been gone now for 25 years and nothing's replaced them. And they fell through the Clinton administration and the Bush administration, and each successive administration has said that somehow these communities are going to regenerate, and they have not. And it's not surprising then that they get bitter. They cling to guns or religion or antipathy toward people who aren't like them, or anti-immigration sentiment or anti-trade sentiment as a way to explain their frustrations. Very similar to what Trump said, to what Obama said in this campaign cycle just a month ago about black men who are reluctant to vote for Kamala Harris, that, oh, it must just be because there's misogynistic sentiments within them. That is what they think about every person who does not immediately get in line with them. They really do assume, this is how liberals think, they assume that people who support Republicans do so solely because they're either stupid or racist, or filled with some other bigotry. It's pure condescension. And it's why it constantly comes out. And of course, they try and clean it up afterwards, but it comes out of the mouth of virtually every Democrat. Here was the Hillary Clinton comment in 2016.
You could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. Right?
The audience loved it. And here's why she said that was justified.
The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it. But that other basket of people are people who feel the government has let them down, the economy has let them down, nobody cares about them.
Because nobody does care about them. And that's what they've come to see. Democrats try to speak politely and admiringly and softly and with compassion about them whenever there's an election approaching every 4 years. But they know that the political system does not, in fact, care about them, that it condescends to them, it sees them as broken, as primitive. And every time Democrats say something like this, the one that came out of Biden's mouth today, Obama's, Hillary's, even just going around calling them all racist, as Obama did, as to why they won't vote for, or misogynistic, as they won't vote for Kamala, reinforces this idea that Democrats see anybody who doesn't obey them as inferior. And that's the only reason why this resonated so much. If it's just a misspeak that has no connection to anything that is already believed, it doesn't really resonate. It only resonates if people already believe that this is how Democrats think, and then something gets said that reinforces it, and that's exactly what happened here. But I do want to say the most important part of all of this is something that, again, very few people are discussing. You see Joe Biden, he cannot speak. His brain does not work. Even the stuff around that comment was so incoherent, even as the White House tried to clean it up in the transcript, you still read it. There's no coherence to it. It's not cogent. He can't complete a sentence. And there have been, we've covered it many times over the last 3 to 6 months, extremely consequential and debatable policy decisions on the part of the U.S. government and the Biden administration. Deploying American troops and the American military to the Mideast in order to defend Israel against possible escalation with Iran or Hezbollah. Bombing the Houthis, bombing various places in Iraq. Sending more military assets over to the region, allocating billions more to the war in Ukraine. We're supposed to have in this country civilian command of the military. We're supposed to elect the head of the executive branch, and nobody else is entitled or empowered to make decisions of that magnitude other than the president. But you have somebody who Democrats basically now admit, that's why they forced him out of the race, cannot function. He cannot think. He cannot understand complex issues. He can't analyze facts. His brain doesn't work. And the vice president who doesn't really have any power unless you remove the president, which they haven't done. But even if you want to say, well, okay, maybe the vice president's doing that, we know that she, as I guess is natural, is focused only on one thing from the minute she wakes up until the minute she goes to sleep, which is not the policy of the U.S. government, but instead is the attempt to empower herself to succeed Joe Biden in the campaign. So when we hear these announcements about the U.S. government decided this or decided that, who is making those decisions? We know it isn't Joe Biden. We know it's not him. We really don't know who it is. You can guess, you can speculate. Maybe his cabinet officials like Anthony Blinken and Lloyd Austin at the Pentagon, maybe his advisors in the White House, but this is a complete subversion of democracy when you don't have an elected official who's running the government. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.